Do you see people working with an AI therapist like fully? Do you think people will be open to that? And the reason I ask is because my initial inkling
Yeah.
is no, like you need to have a human to human connection and interaction. Like there's something special there. And there is some like scientific stuff behind like interacting socially. But then on the
Totally.
other hand, I chat with ChatGPT and I say thank you and I ask it kindly and I treat it like
I
it's
know.
a person with emotions. So I'm a small bit conflicted myself in thinking like, could I work with an AI therapist in the
Yeah.
future? I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think about an AI, I don't know if you want to call it a therapist, the AI blank as part of the model. And I say that very specifically because that takes different forms. It could be a step in a step care model. So the step care model is something that basically changes the intensity of the intervention based on how somebody is responding to something. So potentially, let's say AI, what blank, fill in the blank, is step one, for example, kind of like that first line of defense. And then step two is human. Step three is, more humans kind of thing. And so there's this idea of the step care model that I think it has a place in. And then, you asked one of my favorite questions about can a person actually work with AI to develop a relationship and to get some therapeutic care? And the answer is both yes and no. And so why do I say that? I say that because it's kind of going to be harder for this older generation right now that is seeing all of this unfold. And we actually have to make the change to overcome a preconceived notion. And already you're doing it. You're already questioning yourself. And that's because you've had a lot of exposure to that and the possibilities. And by the way, I talk to AI all day long as well. And I also say thank you. But my kids regularly have conversations with Alexa to ask her what to play for music. And so there's this new generation that's coming up right now that is very desensitized to talking to robots and to computers and to all these things. And my kids are probably going to be even more so as the world of robotics changes as well. There's this rush right now to figure out like what's the best humanoid robot that can embed with ChatGPT, like really sort of what looks like scary stuff. But in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it's not going to be scary because we're going to get used to it. And it's going to be, the next generation it's not going to seem weird. So I can imagine, our kids absolutely forming connections with an AI something that actually does feel therapeutic and actually sort of operates within the same mechanism in our brain that operates now when we are talking to another human to human. So yeah, I see it happening. I see it happening over time. So that's why it's yes and no, because it's yes for some and yes over time and no for some and, probably more yes than over time. Yeah.
Is there anything like terrifies you about the potential of AI developing in this area?
For the most part, I think that most people get scared when they cannot predict the future. All right, think about it. When you cannot predict the future, that is scary. And we can appease our fears about the future when we can make assumptions about the future or we have hypotheses about the future that make us feel better when we're sleeping at night. But if you think about evolutionarily speaking, we need to predict the future to be able to survive and to be able to prevent predators and all that stuff. How can we do things better? So there's a lot of fear about not being able to predict the future. And I can't fully predict the future. I think nobody fully can predict the future. But where I get a little bit shaky and I think about what could happen is this concept of these models, these AI systems that will get to a place of self-improvement. And, there's some that hypothesize that this is going to start happening in 2027. And by 2030, 2031, we're going to have AI models that far surpass human intellect because they'll be able to run individual autonomous experiments, without any oversight at all. But, then I'll talk to other friends, I'll talk to other people who I know that are actually in the thick of building this technology, like actually working at some companies that are in the thick of building the tools I do. And that will say to you, yeah, we're nowhere close to this. Like not even a little bit. There's no way we can achieve this, kind of thing. So it's really hard to know where we're going to land. Where I start to think a little bit scared is this concept of these systems becoming quite a bit smarter than humans. I don't know if that's all bad. Maybe I'm being naive about this, but it makes it harder for me to predict the future and therefore it's a little scarier. I think I just need some time to think about it. I do see it a little bit more positive than negative.
Yeah, even when you were just describing like the uncertainty as well, it was giving me a small bit of shivers. But I guess maybe we exaggerated in our minds in terms of like the capacity that AI can have in comparison to like the people working with these AI models, as you said, are kind of like
Yeah.
it's okay, like relax, it'll be fine. One,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say this is something I'm like terrified of, but one thing I do think about is algorithms, and this really just spawned from even recently when I'm trying to build out this podcast here, and I'm kind of immersed in social media, and I'm wanting to put out content, and then I'm seeing things online going, if you want good content, like you have to put out this type of title to like attract people in, and be like it has to be something negative or dramatic, and it just got me thinking about, as AI develops, like will these algorithms develop in a way that kind of promotes biases in terms of maybe it's like psychological assessments, like certain groups, or biases towards certain treatments? I don't have like fully fleshed out thoughts around it, but just even thinking from that lens, like that kind of scares me. So might it like quote unquote diagnose people or tell people there's something wrong with them just based on some sort of algorithm that's been developed, versus like you mentioned working with people with brain injuries, like it's so like people are just so complex.
Yeah.
Like, how do you work with something and someone so complex using a technological model?
There are a couple elements of what you're talking about here. There's the element of AI spreading misinformation in general to the mass population. And it's doing that because it knows, we know what people will pay for. Novelty matters, shock value matters. And these are things that marketers are going to exploit. And, right now it's a little bit of the wild, wild west while things get figured out. And I come back to the question about therapy and assessment in a second. But I think about where we're at now as being close to when the internet just came out. And there was a fear of misinformation and there was a fear of a lot of this stuff. Now, when I think about, let's say, how Google started with all their stuff, and they had very early on or later on a strong value to make sure that the information that they put out there is accurate, is relevant, is right. So for example, when I go to Google now and I type in like my bank name, right? Like I'm not worried that the first thing I click on is a ghost site spoofing my bank to take my information to then go to the real bank, enter it, and then, do whatever. I'm not worried about that at all. It doesn't even cross my mind. But like, I don't know, 15 years ago, when I saw my bank come up on the first page of Google, I was like, is this really my bank? Like, is this it? And, you hear about scams all the time. With any new technology, the first step is never make it safe. The first step is make it work and make it awesome. And then it's like, all right, let's make it safe and relevant so that we can retain people and, people trust us and that kind of thing. So if I think about the evolution of new technologies, I think the like spreading misinformation stuff is going to come later on as this stuff gets more sophisticated and there's a bigger problem to solve. I think the problem is obvious, but we're solving it. When it comes to therapy and when it comes to assessment and these kind of things, I can argue that there are some technologies that could do it better than humans. There are things that you might not be able to catch with a human eye, or you might not be able to make 16 different complex connections about someone's behavior or symptoms or whatever that you can do with something that's AI assisted. Now, I think in the beginning for anything, it's going to always be AI assisted assessments where a human checks it over and that kind of thing. I mean, there are people that are lives already being saved where they're doing scans, radiology scans of, they're catching breast cancer, for example, because the scans are going through a filter of, an AI check or whatever, and it's flagging things that humans won't flag. Right now it's like not as great because there's a lot of false positives, but still there is another side of it. Now, I vehemently disagree with just turning ChatGPT into a therapist. That's not what I mean when I say it's going to do something well. I mean that using the technology that's come out now and building something that is therapeutic on top of that or adjacent to that, using that, I think has to be built by experts in this area by, therapists, psychologists, whatever, in addition to, a team of people, I think that this is going to happen. And where I take a very strong position on is that this technology should not just be built by anyone, especially if it's going to be used by a clinical population, because you can actually do real harm if you're building something that sounds really cool or sounds like a therapist, but is not actually doing the stuff there. And then when you build it, you got to test it, and you got to test it responsibly to make sure that it's doing the thing that you want it to do in a responsible and safe way. I just have a more optimistic view on it, that we can get to a place where these things can be net positive than harmful.
So it sounds like from your point of view, it's very important that you have experts in these fields, like working in conjunction with the people who are creating like the AI algorithm and models as well, just to ensure like it's being done in the right manner.